Okay.
Okay. Today's date is June 28th. We're
Yeah.
having a discussion with Jeff Halper. We're not going to have the regular simulation. The topic is, will Israel survive the next elections? Before I bring Jeff, I'd like to make an announcement regarding our next speakers. We On July 12th, we will have a simulation with Kishore Bakar, who is a Pakistani writer, commentator, and an educator who speaks a lot about the Israel-Palestine issue. And in August, we are going to have a simulation with Raja Khoury and Jeffrey Wilkerson. They are the authors of The Wall Between What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other, which examines the historical, emotional, and psychological barriers in Israel-Palestine. After I introduce Jeff, I will stop the sharing the screen, and we'll have a full screen to hear and listen to Jeff, and he'll make a short presentation, and then we will have a chance to ask some questions. Will Israel survive the next election? Jeff Halper is an Israeli anthropologist, author, and political activist known for his work on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Born in the United States in 1946, he moved to Israel in 1973 and later became a prominent critic of Israeli policies in the occupied territories. He co-founded the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, an organization opposing the demolition of Palestinians' homes and advocating for a just political resolution between Israelis and Palestinians. Jeff has written extensively on the conflict, lectured internationally, and remained active in peace and human rights advocacy for decades. So here is Jeff. Um, you look good. Um, so tell us your predictions, your analysis of the upcoming elections, and then what you think about Israel-Palestine.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Yossi, for having me. It's good to I don't see you all out there, but to have this discussion. Yeah, I'd like to say a few things and then put it within a framework, the analysis, and then open it up for discussion. But what I first want to start with, which is a little bit frustrating because I've talked about this for years and years and years, is that this is not a conflict. We have to stop using the word conflict. This is a settler colonial situation. There was never a conflict between Jews and Palestinians. There was never a conflict. What happened was, at the turn of the 20th century, Zionism, without advising Palestinians, asking Palestinians, even knowing they exist, in Eastern Europe, decided that they're going to settle and return to and Judaize the land of Israel, which happened to be, I mean, it happened to be Palestine, but who knew? You know, sitting in Minsk and Plonsk. It was a very self-contained movement, had nothing to do with the indigenous population that were, until today, are really irrelevant to the whole Zionist enterprise. And so they basically invaded Palestine. In other words, Jews had come to Palestine, to the land of Israel, for millennia, you know, and but they had come as pilgrims, or in a more modern sense, immigrants. In other words, they had come mainly for religious reasons, Although many Sephardi Jews after the Inquisition came for economic reasons. You know, they had family ties between Egypt and Palestine and Syria and Turkey and so on. You know, Iraq. I mean, there was a whole huge Jewish network, mainly Sephardic Jews. So it wasn't only religious. I mean, there was a real vibrant life here. But they came and they lived with the local populations. They didn't come to take over. They didn't come to Judaize. They didn't come in hostility at all. They didn't see them as enemies. They had no aspirations of taking over the land of Israel. They came to live in the land of Israel or in the region or whatever with the local population. I mean, the Sephardic Jews spoke Arabic, of course. That was their native language. Not to mention all the Mizrahi Jews, you know, that weren't Sephardic that were in this region as well that came and went. So the difference with Zionism is Zionists decided, the Zionist movement decided that they didn't use the term that we're going to take over Palestine. That's the Zionist project. We're going to come not to integrate with the local population, but first of all, they minimized the local population. They said, you know, it's a bunch of Arabs, you know, this famous Zionist line, Palestine, they didn't even say Palestine, it's a land without a people. Now, they knew there were a few Arabs running around with keffiyehs on camels. That's about all they knew. But they weren't a people that added up to a people in the national collective sense that Jews were. This was the Zionist revolution, of course, to redefine Jews from a people, a culture, a religion, you know, it took on all kinds of forms, an ethnic group into a national group. And if you're a national group, you have a right to self-determination in your homeland. Well, where's your homeland? Your homeland is the land of Israel. And if you don't recognize that there's another people living in that territory, and that was, of course, a key to Zionism, because had they recognized until today that there is a Palestinian people, that would have made Zionism impossible. But Israel has never until this minute recognized the existence, not to mention the national rights of a Palestinian people. So there's an exclusive claim to the land. From the very beginning, the idea was this land belongs to us exclusively. There is no other claimant. It's morally just, historically just, that we come back to the land that we were thrown out of by the Romans, which is a myth, because the Romans never expelled the Jews. That's simply not true in history, but it became part of the whole narrative. Because every settler colonial movement has to develop a narrative to explain why it's invading somebody else's country and taking it over. It could be manifest destiny. It could be the French idea of civilization. Whatever it is, every settler colonial movement has to justify itself. Otherwise, you're just coming in and conquering somebody and taking their land. You know, you don't want to be seen by yourself as a thief. And so you make up this whole narrative that this is our land and there's no Arabs and the Arabs live somewhere else and the land is barren and it's just waiting for us to come back and we were thrown out. We have all these kinds of things. Okay. The point is this, that settler colonialism is a zero-sum game. It has no political ending. That's where it's different from a conflict. In a conflict, you have two sides, right? You have sides, two, three sides, whatever. There's some dispute. And the sides then have to somehow resolve the dispute. So what do? Conflict resolution. And this is where, because the situation, this isn't just semantics, because the situation has been misdiagnosed all these years, that's why all these negotiation processes, from the roadmap to the Y plantation, can't even remember them all, Oslo and everything else, failed. Because you're applying a conflict resolution model to a settler colonial enterprise that's unilateral. There is no other side. Zionism never saw this as a conflict. Israelis would never talk about a conflict with Palestinians. Because all we're doing is reclaiming our own homeland that belongs to us. There is no other side. And Zionism, that's why Israelis, the Israeli governments and so on, cannot ever negotiate with Palestinians. They can never find a compromise. They can never get to a resolution because either Zionism, and Jabotinsky says this explicitly in his 1923 essay, The Iron Wall, that you should all read. Anybody that doesn't think this is colonialism should read The Iron Wall, because Jabotinsky absolutely puts this out as a colonial movement, Zionism as a colonial movement. Read it. It's brilliant, scary, but it's exactly, the kinds of terminology we should use. And he says it's a zero-sum game because in every colonial movement, he mentions the American Indians. In every colonial situation, the indigenous population or the native population that he uses, I mean, today would we wouldn't talk about the Palestinians today as a native population. The native population always resists, so in other words, Jabotinsky said the only way we can prevail as Zionists is through an iron wall. In other words, our military strength, our political strength, our economic strength, the strength of our settling the country, displacing the Palestinians, replacing them with ourselves, that's the iron wall that in the end, the only way out, the only way Zionism can prevail is through despair. Despair, not negotiations, not compromise, despair. And that was actually a whole strategy that Sharon adopted very explicitly, the idea in 2002 in Operation Defensive Shield of creating despair among the Palestinians as an antidote to the Oslo process. And the other way around as well. Palestinians, as an indigenous population, never saw themselves in a conflict with another side. I mean, colonialism, I hope we agree on this, is illegal, it's unjust, it's immoral. You're coming in to take someone else's country, exploit them, displace them. Genocide is built into settler colonialism. It has to be, because you can't take over someone's land and displace them and replace even their cultural presence with your own without genocide. I mean, it's built in. So that the Palestinians couldn't possibly recognize Zionists or Israeli Jews as a side. There is no legitimacy to the Zionist side. So both sides, so-called, are not sides. The Zionists came in unilaterally to invade, and the Palestinians are an indigenous population that are resisting and trying to gain their liberation, right? And so if you try to apply a conflict resolution model to that, with negotiations and all, it doesn't work. Because what do we, and certainly for Palestinians, first of all, you're putting a powerful state actor with a powerful military, with the support of the world superpower that has conquered the entire country and rules it militarily, in negotiations with the other side, which are Palestinians that have no leverage whatsoever. I mean, even that equation is ridiculous. But beyond that, what are we asking? What do we mean by conflict resolution negotiations? We mean compromise. Well, what are we expecting the Palestinians to compromise on? How much of their country belongs now to the Jews that invaded 100 years ago? Like 78% of their country at least? Are they supposed to compromise on how many refugees can come back? Are they supposed to compromise? They're forced to compromise their own human rights, their own history, even to deny their own history, because part of the Zionist demand, and you see it in every single draft agreement, is that the Palestinians accept Israel as a legitimate construct. So they have to even not only accept that they've been conquered and colonized, they have to accept that colonization process is legitimate. So conflict resolution is a disaster for the Palestinians. And that's why this whole thing. So we have to stop using the term conflict. There aren't two sides. And we have to begin to use the colonial terminology that comes from settler colonialism. And let me just say this in a minute, and then I'll go on to where Israel is today. And I'll do this briefly. So in settler colonialism, then, it means something. We say it sometimes. It's become a term that has gotten into the public discourse. I go to all kinds of rallies. The first line is Zionism is settler colonialism. Okay. Then we sort of say that, and then we go on. It hasn't been internalized. And maybe because most people aren't academics, it's a complex concept. And my part of my job, and Yossi is one of my main targets here, is to try to bring people away from conflict and to adopt it, because once you adopt the settler colonial model, it changes everything, including, I would say, Yossi's project, but we'll get into that maybe later on. So that it means three things, settler colonialism. I'll just say this. The first part of settler colonialism is invasion, settlement, and Judaization. So you see, this is a key word, Judaization. This is the very essence of Zionism. Do we ever use that word? Have you ever seen that word used in a demonstration, in a webinar? We don't use that term because we're missing the key dynamics, the key terms, because we have the wrong paradigm, which is conflict. So Judaization is the first, and we've completed the process of Judaizing Palestine, basically. The second phase is pacification. Let me come back to that in a second. And the third phase, which is how settler colonialism wins. I mean, you just look at the United States and you can see this process as well. The third stage that we're well into is pacification, normalization. Normalization. That's how settler colonialism wins. In other words, you have the Abraham Accords. Israel's grabbed the land. It's displaced the population. It's Judaized the country. And the Palestinians can never agree to that. So you can never have that through agreement. So normalization is not a negotiated process. The Palestinians aren't a part of it. It's an imposed condition by states for their own reasons. It's the United States, Israel, and the Arab countries, and a few Muslim countries as well, that impose normalization. So basically, everything Israel can grab until the day that Saudi Arabia joins in particular is Israel. It's not negotiated. In other words, Israel plus its greater Israel, plus its Judaization of the West Bank is accepted by the international community. De facto or de jure. You don't have to join the Abraham Accords. You just accept it, like Syria, for example. And that's how it wins. So the only way to defeat settler colonialism is through decolonization. This is the issue, decolonization. You can't compromise, you can't negotiate out, you've got to simply, however you can, stop the settler colonial state in its tracks, and I won't get into all those strategies and so on. And in the end, you decolonize, meaning that you dismantle all the structures of domination and control that the Zionists have put over Palestine. You create a level playing field, and then, and this is crucial, you've got to have somewhere to go. To make the Israeli regime collapse, like in South Africa, for example, is not enough. Because the question is, where are we going? So I'm a part of a group called the One Democratic State Campaign. And the only really way, logically, politically, out of settler colonialism is one democratic state. One state to transform Israel and the occupation into one democratic state between the river and the sea of equal rights for all its citizens. And there's a whole issue that has to be resolved. Where does nationalism fit in? I'm not going to get into there right now, but you've got this tension between a civil state and Israeli and Palestinian and Islamic nationalism fitting in. That's another issue. Refugees return, and you have a civil democracy. That's the only way That's the only way out. And that's what South Africa did. So really, it's not a matter of, there's sort of another angle to what, this webinar is asking. Will Israel survive the next elections? You know, kind of assuming a coming collapse. Ilan Pappé just wrote a book called Israel on the Brink, where he's talking about that. I think it's wishful thinking, but he writes about that as well. Well, that's not enough, because what if Israel does collapse? But there's no plan for where are we going with that. You know, collapse can create a disaster. Look at what happened to most of the states in Africa and in the global South that freed themselves of colonialism and then fell into civil wars and instability. You've got to have somewhere to go. And for the international community, they will not accept the collapse of Israel. States will not accept the collapse of another state because it's threatening to them. All these states have their own dynamics and so on. So what the ANC succeeded in doing was a transition. This is a key term, a transition from apartheid to democracy. So in that sense, the international community could deal with that, with transition. It couldn't have dealt with collapsing South Africa, and then we'll see what happens with the blacks and the whites and everybody else. So there has to be a strong Palestinian element that is missing today, actually, to define what transition means and where are we going in this country. So there's at least three terms we talked about that are really crucial that come out of this that we don't use: Judaization, pacification, and normalization. I mean, these are, and we might even put in there transition as well, because there has to be, nobody's thinking of a transition because there is no political program. The Palestinians have not put forth, we have a draft program, but for all kinds of reasons, haven't put it forth, and so they're not even at the table. So we're stuck in this dynamic, and that's where Israel is managing to survive, because there's a political void. Israel's weak, it's vulnerable, it's under attack, it's being isolated, but without some Palestinian pushback or leadership or direction, where do you want to go, supported by anti-colonial Jews like me in Israel, there's nowhere to go. And so you end up having to deal with Israel somehow because there's no alternative. So just to answer the question really quickly, Israel will survive the next elections, maybe, because they're going to be in 3 months, probably October 20th. And I think Netanyahu is going to be, I mean, it gets really weird here, to tell you the truth. Netanyahu is not going to get reelected. I mean, but the problem is that the opposition here is a Likud opposition, except for this little party called the Democrats, which is basically the Labor Party and Meretz that came together, that might get 6 or 7 seats out of 120. So they're not exactly an opposition left bloc. All the others are going to be Likud. Bennett and Lapid, they were both prime ministers in the last government. They're the heads of the opposition with Eisenkot. You know what the slogan of their party is? We're the real Likud. How's that for a slogan for the opposition? So that you're going to get a super right-wing government. Eisenkot is right now the front runner in terms of becoming prime minister. A vicious guy, very calm, a little bit fat, kind of grandfatherly, lost his son in Gaza, very soft-spoken. I mean, you have no idea where he stands on anything because he never says anything. But people like him and they hate Netanyahu, so he's become the front runner. He's the author in the in the invasions of Beirut of what's called the Dahya Doctrine, which was applied to Gaza and parts of the West Bank. Dahya being the Shiite neighborhood, the Hezbollah neighborhood in Beirut. And the Dahya Doctrine says Israel will on purpose, deliberately, in your face, violate the two basic principles of international law. One is the principle of proportionality, that you're forbidden to react in a way that's out of proportion to the threat, and the principle of distinction, that you have to make an army has to make a distinction between civilians and combatants. The Dachia Doctrine says no. We will attack everybody absolutely to the fullest extent, in terms of any threat that comes. And you see that applied. That's where Gaza comes from. And it's been reapplied to Beirut to some degree as well. This is the guy that's going to replace Netanyahu. So he'll be less corrupt. He'll be less divisive, probably. It won't have all the crazies in government that we have today, but it's going to be a super right-wing government. So there's nothing to look at from there. But even the Democrats, the Labor Party, refuse a two-state solution. Even the left here says, what they say is this isn't the time to talk about it. So there is no party whatsoever that's going to move forward politically in any way. Now, the problem is that we have a coalition government here. So Netanyahu and his bloc, right, the Likud kind of right-wing with the ultra-Orthodox and the religious, the settlers and so on, according to the polls, would get something like 53 seats out of the 120. So if it's 120, you need at least 61 to set up a government, right? But you really need 62, 63, 64 because people move around and it's easy to get people to defect. So you need a little margin. Well, where's Netanyahu going to get 10 seats? So I don't think he can put together a government. The opposition will probably get, according to the polls, between 57 and up to 59 seats, 57, 58, 59 seats. Still not enough. It's not 61. All right, where are they going to get the other 5 seats that they're going to need? Well, the Arabs, as we call the Palestinians here. See, we even in that sense, we don't recognize a Palestinian. We call them Arabs. The Arab parties are going to get at least 10 seats in the Knesset. If they combine, they could get up to 15. But let's say 10. Well, neither side is going to put together a government without the Arabs. One's got 53, one's got 57, 58. They can't do it. But both sides say we will not bring Arabs into the government. We refuse to do that. So it's an own goal, to use the soccer phrase, you're getting to a point, and this happened the last few times. Remember, we had a few elections before Bennett and Lapid got in. And Bennett and Lapid finally got in because they swallowed that frog and did bring in the Islamic Party. That's how they got their government. Well, it just shows that even across the board in Israel, you would rather forfeit getting into power to sitting with Arabs in a government, to legitimizing an Arab presence. And so that's really kind of where we are politically. So Israel, I think, will survive, partly because, there's still a process going on, but it's very weak and it has no, but again, I'll end on this. Again, you go back to the settler colonial idea, because there is no way out except to deal with the Palestinians. And the Palestinians aren't even an issue. They're never mentioned in these campaigns at all. So Israel's really, let's say, what's it called? Caught in its own petard. So the real now, just one thing, so the real question really isn't, because I think this is behind the question, will Israel survive the elections? The real question we're talking about is, if Israel does collapse, I mean, who cares if Israel collapses? You don't live in Israel. You don't really care. What you care about is, what about the Palestinians? If Israel collapses, is that good or bad for the Palestinians? What does it mean for them? And what I'm saying is, the collapse is only possible if there's a plan of where we're going next, like a one democratic. state plan articulated by Palestinians and some Israelis that the international community can come around again. And only if there's a transition. Collapse by itself will not happen. As weak as Israel as it will be economically, isolated and so on, a collapse will not be allowed to happen because it's too threatening to the wider international community. So we have to look not at collapse, but we have to look at, well, let's put it this way, like the ANC. We have to look at collapse followed by transition to something better that is seen by the world as also protecting Israeli Jews. And that, in my view, is the one democratic state plan. The problem is, again, that the Palestinians are under such repression from Israel and the PA that they're not able to take the leadership role. They're simply not able. I mean, anybody that steps out is going to get killed or imprisoned, and so we're really in a bind. Israel and the PA are succeeding in preventing any kind of alternative leadership to emerge that's really necessary, because this has to be led by Palestinians. We can't represent Palestinians. We can't speak for them. We can't do anything without their permission, or at least the permission of the critical mass of people we work with. And so without that, we're also kind of paralyzed. I wrote an article in 2005 in the Journal of Palestine Studies called Paralysis in Palestine. And, that's still the situation we're in. So those were my brief remarks. Yossi, you want to start a discussion?
Well, yeah, you did say that I almost agree with everything you said, with the exception that there is nowhere to go. And there is a way to go, and that's the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We are working on that. It is accepted by Palestinians and Israelis almost equally. And we have a constitution, and it is an alternative whether or not Israel collapses. So you said that there has to be an alternative. There has to be a place to go. And I think the place to go is the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, because it fits your criteria. It is if a one state, one government for all the people in Israel-Palestine. So I fail to see what's wrong with it.
Well, you want to get back? First of all, it doesn't decolonize. It leaves Israel. I mean, I'm not sure what one state means. You can't have one state and two states squeezed together in some common kind of a framework. If it's Israel, like the flag behind you, if it's Israel-Palestine, it's not one state. I mean, those are two different states, and with an asymmetric power balance and with asymmetric morality. Why would Palestinians? I don't agree with you that Palestinians would accept the Israeli side. And maybe a few Palestinians that we talk to, but basically, no. If you talk to especially the young generation of Palestinians, not only here, but in the US as well, they would never accept an Israeli presence. The one state idea says Israeli Jews remain in the country, of course, as equal citizens. But the question, the Palestinians this is their question. All right, we're not going to throw them out. They'll be here as equal citizens. The question is, will they be equal citizens in a civil state that belongs to all its citizens, or will they be equal citizens but in a Palestinian state? Palestinians really want a Palestinian state. And the danger of that, of course, is it begins to replicate Israel. It's like Arabs in Israel have equal rights as Israelis in a Jewish state. Well, we know how well that worked. So, you just reverse that and say, well, Israeli Jews will have equal rights in a Palestinian state, creates all kinds of contradictions and difficulties. All these things have to really be fleshed out that I try to do in my different discussions and so on. But the idea of somehow leaving Israel intact and a Palestinian and a Palestine that's gone through 130 years of colonization, where they don't have the land, they have no leverage, they have no economy, the population, half the population is not even in the country, and so on. To all of a sudden put those entities together is to somehow assume that you're not going to decolonize, that the power differentials remain, and the state systems in a way remain. I don't think is a goes together with the idea of of decolonizing settler colonialism.
Jeff, the IPC and Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not require the existence of the state of Israel or the
So who's the
Palestinian
Confederation?
state. It
Well,
it it,
the
it is
Confederation
it
applies.
is an entity for the people of Palestine and Israel, whether or not the Israeli or the Palestinian governments exist, or it doesn't require, it doesn't stand on the shoulders of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. It is a government for the people for 15.5 million people, with separation between government and religion, with equality, with 300 parliament members representing 300 districts in the entire area.
What about the refugees?
The parliament members will decide all the issues. It's
Okay.
it's not it's not it's not me who will decide. It's not you. It's the elected people, the people who will
Israeli
be.
Jews should not decide whether Palestinian refugees come back. That's not a decision. They have a right to come back. There's no
Okay.
decision.
Wait,
You're
so
giving settler colonists, you're giving colonists the power to decide things about the colonized people, and ignoring their inalienable rights.
so you're advocating for one state with the exclusion of Israelis to be Jews to make decisions? Is that the one state that you think is a realistic one or a proper one?
You can't
I
make
agree with
decisions.
you that Jews are the colonizer, no question about it, but they have to be taken into reality.
Of course, but the colonized have rights, including rights of self-determination. And those rights cannot be infringed upon or decided about by the colonists.
So your concept of a one state is that the Palestinians will be the exclusive power.
No, no, no. It's a state of all its citizens. So its
Well,
citizens.
that's what we are. That's what we are proposing: a government for all its citizens, including Jews. I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah. But
So I fail to
but that
understand why
but
you
that
do
even
not follow,
that's
you do not support us. I
no,
fail to understand that.
no, because even a Palestinian state, if it was 90% Palestinian, would not have the right to infringe on the right of refugees to come back. They have a right.
Well, that's not
So nobody can
that's
decide.
not a response
All right.
to what we are promoting. We are promoting one government for all the people in Israel, Palestine, that would be equal to the Palestinians and the Israelis, with equal representation, with equal say, with equal power, separation between government and religion. But
Yeah, but that's not agreed upon also by people. In the Middle East,
yeah,
there you've got
you're
the
not going to
majority
get
of
a
Israelis.
concept that
Wait a
is agreed upon by all people. There is
The
no
majority of
concept.
Israelis are religious, and the vast majority of Palestinians are religious. They wouldn't agree
Yeah,
to a
but that
separation.
doesn't mean that they would not accept a government that's separate between religion and government. They can practice their religion. In fact, they will have much greater ability to practice their religion. Uh, we are talking about the government separating between government and religion, not the people. The people can still practice their religion.
Should we open this up for a wider
Yeah,
discussion? I see your
yeah.
hand, so
Sorry, I didn't even think that we were going to get there, but go ahead. Let's. Nasir is our moderator. He moderates the discussion. Go ahead, Nasir.
Thank you. Hi, Jeff. Nice to hear you. Nice to see you. Shlomo had his hand up from the beginning, so I think I'm gonna give him the opportunity. I also want to follow up with something that both Joseph and you discussed. Go ahead, first, Shlomo, and then we'll go move on to Anne. There's
Okay.
also I'm sorry, Shlomo, there's also a message in the text. I'll read it off. Someone posed a question that I thought was interesting. Go ahead, Shlomo, first.
Okay. Okay. I first of all agree with you on everything. I just have a few just small comments. One comment: the Jews in Eastern Europe who decided about the establishment of a Jewish state, they were had nothing to do with religion. They concluded that Jews will never be accepted any place, and there is no choice. And if they want to live with dignity, etc., etc., they have to go there somewhere. Initially, just to remind you, it was Argentina, then Uganda, and eventually got to, yeah, okay. So that's the history. Now, number two, uh, don't forget another term in that equation, which is the United States of America. And now take a step back and look, what is Israel? When you say you want to solve the problem, you need to define Israel. Now, if Israel more and more looks like a military base supported by the United States to control the Middle East, something along this line, and there is a state attached to it. And so we need to take a look at it in this way in order to solve this equation that you are talking about. And I agree, the word conflict is totally irrelevant.
Can
One
I
word that,
interrupt for 1 second? So it's a
sure.
joke. If nothing else, I'll leave you all with a joke about what you just said. Why, we always talk about Israel as the 51st state, although now they've been pushed aside for Canada. So we'll see. But 51st, 52nd state. There's a joke. Why doesn't Israel want to be the 51st state? Because then I would only have two senators.
Because then they have to
Senators.
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 They'll only have two senators. So anyway, that's kind of yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, at the end, it will be the United States who will make the decision here anyway. But anyway, we need to find out, solve it.
Mm.
With the U.S. side, I agree. One very strong word that you say that is my nightmare is normalization, and you're completely right. We normalize everything. We know the time in the Second World War, even the Holocaust was normalized. So, and we normalize the United States, ICE, and with the fascism that is now controlling the United States. We normalize, and people get used to it, and they don't want to fight. That's why it's very convenient. Okay, number three. Uh, I'm wondering, so what is wrong about Ilan Pappes? Because it sounds so he has this illusion, or we all have illusions here. We do have an idealization and idealism of what could be. I mean, that's okay. This is the goal eventually. It doesn't mean that we reach it. So I'm still don't not clear to me what your solution is. One more important word that I'm also another becomes a nightmare, which is self-determination. Who needs it? What our self-determination is human being try to live together on this planet. Why self-determination of why nationality is so important? Why this nationalism is a poison? This was the poison that capitalism put into the pot in order to divide and rule. How about no state solution? I don't know if you heard, but there is something like
Yeah,
no
yeah.
state solution. Anyway, so those are my thoughts for now. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you much. No, I think you touched on the just to say a word about it. This issue of nationalism is really is it's true. It's really an issue. I mean, this Zionism developed at a time, of course, where nationalism was really in Eastern Europe, but it was a certain kind of nationalism. This is what feeds into settler colonialism because it's an ethno-nationalism. It wasn't the nationalism of the United of Thomas Jefferson or of France or Britain or whatever. which is a kind of civic nationalism. In the West, in Europe and the West, you've got this concept of a citizen. The state belongs to the citizens. And then within that, you can have any identity you want. National, if you're a Native American, maybe, although national didn't really fit, but or ethnic or religious or whatever. But in Eastern Europe, where Zionism came from, this is where the vast majority of Jews lived. Ukraine, just think of them today. Hungary, Austria, Germany, Poland and so on, Russia. These are countries that had a very different form of nationalism than the United States. These were based on ethnic national groups, ethno-nationalism, with religion, Christianity and all that stuff. So that Hungary, you see it today with Orban. I mean, and now Orban's success. Hungary belongs to Hungarians. I mean, the reason why Jews and Roma were the two main groups that were persecuted was that they were seen as the ones that they were nations within nations. They weren't part of our national, and so I agree with you. It's tremendously destructive. But this is when the Zionists came to define the Jews. I mean, what right do Jews have to come back as a people to the land? Well, they had to they adopted this whole national. And then, of course, we were a nation in the biblical times and all that stuff. So they adopted that, but they adopted the ethno-nationalism, which is exclusive. So to the same degree that Hungary belongs exclusively to Hungarians, so the land of Israel belongs exclusively to the Jews. You can see, had Zionism begun in Paris, it might have taken a different form, but that's a part of it as well. So if you combine the Bible, which is really genocidal and ethno-nationalist, with ethno-nationalism of late 19th century Europe, with the whole dynamic of settler colonialism itself, I think that explains, how we've gotten to where we are. Well, just one other little point that you mentioned, the Zionists we're not a strong group. This is in the whole context of Eastern Europe. The Jews are trying to figure out, as the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapses, as you get states emerging, Ukraine and the Balkans and Poland, where do we fit in? And most of the Jews were assimilationists, especially in Poland, but at other places, they wanted to assimilate. Other Jews were the Bund. That said, no, we're Jews, but we belong to the country we live in, as the title of the book says. Others said, let's get out. The ultra-Orthodox said, let's hunker down because we have our own lives. We don't care as long as they leave us alone. And a small group, it's estimated to be maybe 3% of the Jews in Eastern Europe, said, no, they kind of copied the nationalisms that were emerging in Eastern Europe and applied that to Palestine. So it wasn't a huge movement. It was a very, very tiny movement, in fact. But of course, it was Chaim Weizmann that changed the equation with the Balfour and all of that. Anyway, all this history is really very important. So we should, because that's what I'm saying. I'm getting people to try to adopt the settler colonial view, because that will raise questions for you and give you threads to investigate and things to look at as you're reading history that you're not, right now, history is sort of disconnected from what's going on politically. Are we going to do Oslo? What about Iran? Who cares about Eastern Europe 100 years ago? But you begin to see that the whole contiguity and the continuity and the whole and the logic of it and how that really does affect where we're going today. And if you have this conceptual framework of settler colonialism, it really begins to open up history books in ways that I think maybe you don't have today.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let me ask you, the issue that I have with the one democratic state solution and these types of solutions that wants to you want to take it on immediately, is that you can definitely convince the Palestinians. I think the Palestinians would be open for anything. They just want to see any kind of resolution. I think you can convince the world, because the world.
No, not every time. But
Well, as a Palestinian, I think we're in the situation to say like anything, any solution, just moving forward. But what I'm seeing is that the problem is Israeli society. Israeli society itself is the one that has to be sort of convinced that has to be changed because first of all, most Israelis are extremists. This is the population, and it's even more so today than ever. So maybe what people like who support something like confederation or a two-state solution that looks more like a confederation or something see it as a stepping stone. I feel that people like Joseph and yourself and me and etc. We have the end plan, what we want. We want a civic democratic society for everybody where everybody's equal and lives in the land, etc. But the problem is, how do we get there from here? And I think that people like you and what you're advocating is very, noble, very, what's the solution? But the problem is it's not going to happen overnight. And as Palestinians, we're sitting here saying that we don't have 10 to 15 years to wait for something like this. I honestly think that we don't even have 10 years. And this is the transition. So it's not where we need to go, it's how do we go. And I look at, for example, countries like Europe, how France developed, how, there's French, what is French nationalism? If you went to France a few hundred years ago, France, Germany, Italy, these countries were not identified as their nationality. They were mixed of different states, but eventually they became sort of national identities. So I don't see why or how Palestine and Israel can just be jumped into a one-state solution and everybody's into one country. It would really require sort of decades of doing business together, having some sort of sort of confederation model, just like the European Union. The European Union didn't happen overnight.
Well, there's an urgency here. I mean, I want it to happen overnight. It's got to happen overnight. Otherwise, in the time we've probably had this webinar, there's probably 10 houses that have been demolished. Israel's probably grabbed another 1,000 acres of land on the West Bank. This is a dynamic process, this colonialism. It goes on all the time, and Palestinians there's no time. That's why the settler colonialism thing is so important. I just wrote an article called "Where Are We in the Struggle?" We don't know because we look at this as kind of open-ended. Well, it'll go on, and we have to have meetings, and we have to organize, and we haven't organized yet, but no, there's an end game here. The end game is normalization. The Abraham Accords are in place. Israel and the US are working very hard. That's the end. Normalization is a closure. There is no political space after normalization. Normalization is normalization, and the Palestinians will come and say, wait a minute, we're left with 10% of our country in little tiny enclaves in an Israeli apartheid system that's been normalized. What about our rights? And the answer is going to be, sorry, we've moved on. This has been normalized. It's not an issue anymore. Normalization turns a political situation into a non-issue. There's no negotiations. It disappears. It's off the table. And now we move on to Sudan. We have the Ukraine. We've got other urgent issues coming about. That's the real danger the Palestinians are under. And this has to be overnight, I think, or else the Palestinians could lose. This isn't, this whole idea of Martin Luther King of the arc of history, whatever tends towards justice is very mystical, but it's not true. And so, we've got to be political. We're not political today. If you think about it, we've got BDS movements, we have human rights movements, we have people going to the International Court of Justice, we've got all kinds of campaigns, we've got activist groups, we've got academics having conferences and writing about things. We got everything going on. There's nothing political. There isn't one single political group that exists. The PLO doesn't exist. The PA is collaborationist. The political parties of Palestine are all dysfunctional and basically gone. There's no joint Israeli-Palestinian anything here because it really has to be led from here politically. And there's no, and therefore I think the movements abroad that are so important, what you're all doing, you're kind of floundering because you can't liberate Palestine from Los Angeles. It's got to be done from here. So this is an urgent political issue, I think. And again, the ANC, South Africa is kind of an inspiration for us. It's very different in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of similarities as well. You can't wait for the colonial people to agree to end colonialism. Why would they do that? Why would Israel want to live with Palestinians in a state? They have everything now. They got all the land. They got military control. They got the economy. They're on top. Why would they want to give that up to Arabs that are terrorists? They all believe they're terrorists. Why would we make ourselves vulnerable? That's what the Begin once said. Peace sounds good, but peace makes us more vulnerable. And the ANC said, we're not going to wait for the whites to agree to dismantle apartheid. So you ignore them, you bypass them. And our strategy is to forget about the Israelis. They'll never agree, ever, ever, ever. And so you've got to create an alliance between Palestinians and anti-colonial Israelis here with a political program, and then go to the international community. Go to all of you, you go to your governments and so on, and replicate a situation like in South Africa where the government collapses. And then we move on to something else. Without the whites didn't agree, but the whites went through the transition. And here too, Israelis will never agree. But without a choice, they're going to have to go through a transition. But that's why the transition to what has to be acceptable to the international community. Because no one's going to, certainly Jews, going to force Jews to go into the transition in which,
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen to them. So I don't agree. I don't think we have to do any work in Israel. I think our work has to be with Palestinians, and then build that political movement, and then cause the collapse, and Israelis will come into it without a choice. That's the way I look at it.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to pose a question that was put in the chat by Tiak Scala Network. And it says that it's addressed to you, Jeff. And it says Gideon Levy just wrote that Israel is not an apartheid state, but a transfer state, noting that the South African regime never aimed to kick out the indigenous population as Israel is doing. So how would a single democratic state be possible with even fewer Palestinians?
First of all, there's one democratic state, all Palestinians can come home.
Okay.
That's the thing. We have trouble imagining. That's also part of what I try to do in my writing. I have a book called Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, which I try to get into the imagining. Palestinians, for example, always ask me, well, if there's one state, what about the wall? It's one state. What about the settlements? No, I mean, it's hard for people even to get the concept of what one kind of
Well,
normal.
you have to understand it's like people like me, this is our life, or since we were born. We know no other life. You're Israelis that live in Tel Aviv and stuff, they know what it's like to drive and go to city without ever seeing a checkpoint. We don't know that. This is what we've seen. It's hard.
That's right.
So
No, I'm sure.
yeah, so I wanted to go to some of the questions. I'm going to go in this order because some people raise their hands that haven't spoken before. So Joseph and Shlomo, can I put you guys toward the latter part? We'll go to Anne and then Rana and then Tina, and then we'll do Joseph and Shlomo in those order. Also,
Okay.
we're good on time. I think we're good. Joseph, are we set for the same schedule? I want to make sure we give everybody time. But we should be good. I think we're good. Go ahead, Anne.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joseph, for having these talks, and nice to see Jeff. I think I've met you once before. I wanted to ask, in advance of the elections, what are some of the changes in Israeli society right now? Is the emigration level, are those with U.S. passports leaving? Is that a factor? And also, what about the demoralization of the army within Israeli society? I mean, we see a lot of the changes on the Palestine side, of course, but what about some of the changes in Israel? Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, there's a big change here. I mean, Israel really is in many ways collapsing. That's why I say, it could be pushed a little bit more, but those processes are in place. And part of it is, it's interesting, October 7th in Gaza. Because, even though Israelis are so extreme and, 94% supported the genocide in Gaza, partly because they're locked. Settler colonialism is a trap. Because once you get into that, again, there's no way out. You can't, even if you recognize that there is a Palestinian people, which is, the basis of Joseph's project and everything. That destroys what's known, we have codes here, what's known as the moral basis of Zionism. Zionism is a zero-sum game. This is either our country, and we have a historical right to it, and the return is justified, and we're doing okay, and the Palestinians can stay here as long as they submit, but this is a Jewish state, or we might as well go home. Zionism loses, and Jabotinsky talks about that in the Iron Wall. He addresses that. He said either Zionism is good and just and moral, or we go home. And if we decide it's good and just and moral, then we have to just go with it for everything. So I think, that Israelis are trapped in that. They've never been given, they have no alternative because it's too threatening, any alternative. But so what October 7th did was all of a sudden, I think Israelis were confronted by the dead end that they're in, that they really have nowhere to go. The whole idea when Netanyahu talked about total victory, I mean, that went hollow, and even the army laughed at that. There's no military way out. There's no political way out because you can't negotiate because there's no other side. And you want to continue, of course, in the right-wing government, the settlers really have the power, Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and all these crazy people. So you're not going to stop the settlement movement. So you're getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole. So there's two ways to go, I guess. One is to political change. Let's change this whole situation. But that's not happening because, like I said, it's wall-to-wall right-wing. So in the next elections, there is no peace camp or peace plan or peace process versus Netanyahu and the Likud. It's all Likud. So you're not going to. So what really is happening? It's true, emigration. The only other way is you just get out. And I think, people here that are more educated, that are more liberal, secular, just despair of changing anything. I mean, we had all these hundreds of thousands of people going out on the streets against judicial reform a few years ago, and then for the hostages, and it had absolutely no effect on the government whatsoever. And so I think that's what's happening. There's emigration. There's a huge brain drain here, and the high-tech industry is really suffering. And then BDS is feeding in, which is also good, because there's less and less investments in Israeli, high-tech. But in addition to that, just to bring you a little bit into the internal stuff, you also have the rise of the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews. Now, the ultra-Orthodox Jews are a population here that refuses any sense of modernity. They don't learn anything in school except the Torah and religious and Talmud and all that. They refuse to learn foreign languages, math, any secular subjects whatsoever. Now, when I came to Israel 50 years ago, they were 4% of the population. The Haredi population, this ultra-Orthodox, like the Hasidic Jews, you call them in the States, double in population every generation. They have 3 times more children than the other populations here. And so what's happening is today they're about 25% of the population. I mean, they're younger still. It hasn't completely gotten into the political system yet. But, and in the next, 20, 25 years, they'll be half the population. So here you're going to have, what is that going to mean when you have on the one hand a brain drain, and on the other hand, half the population are people that don't even know what high tech is. They don't allow their people to use high tech for the most part, like cell phones, because that exposes them to the outside world. So that's an interesting demographic kind of a thing that's happening. And then, of course, you have, the isolation, the international isolation. And I think that Israelis are feeling that as well, very much so. So I think they're stuck. The Israelis are stuck. I don't accept this idea that they're evil people. I think it's an evil system But we're all we're all stuck in an evil capitalist neoliberal system too. So we're all stuck in our systems. They're stuck in this settler colonial system. But at the same time, they don't see a way out. And I think what's going to happen is Israel is going to get weaker and weaker. Now, at the same time, as collapse happens, and people have written about this, it also becomes more violent. We have a concept in Israel called the Samson option, and that is,
Mhm.
in the end, if our back is against the wall, we're going down. You're going down with us. The Arab countries around and Europe. I mean, Israel's missiles, like the Jericho ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, reach Europe easily. So the idea is we're not going to go down alone. And I think that's something you have to put into the equation. The international community might simply allow Israel to exist because it's afraid of what's going to happen if it actually does collapse. So there's all kinds of dynamics that we have to take into account with the collapse. But again, I think, our problem is, as Palestinians and anti-colonial Israelis, with your help, is how do we get into the game? How do we get to the table? How do we become political actors in all of this instead of being so marginal as we are? Because all these things are happening and they help us, but we've got to seize the moment. We don't seize those opportunities, and right now there's a paralysis. We're not doing it. And that's really what worries me more than anything else.
Okay. So let's hear from Rana. Rana, if you wanted to go, and then we'll go with Tina.
Hi. Just thinking about the conversation between Yusuf and Jeff, about the Confederation idea and one state, and trying to, think of something or consider something similar in that idea. I never hear about the historical one state ideology that unified Palestinian and Israeli communists and Marxists, except through my father, who's a Nakba survivor. So I wanted to, and I'm not saying implement communism and Marxism necessarily, but I'm just bringing up that historically there was a precedence of unity between Israelis and Palestinians, uh, resisting some of these colonial frameworks and ideology. Uh, you know, uh, at least in the 50s, maybe 40s, 30s. I'm not exactly sure because I was not alive then, and I hear these stories from my father. So, and and I'm also not saying only include Marxists and communists, but I'm just pointing out that there was a precedent of people historically, decades and generations ago, that believed in this. And I think there are also there's growth in this ideology of coming together somehow, because we're not all insane. I'm Palestinian, both my mother and father, Nakba survivors, born in Israel, resettled elsewhere. Myself, I'm a child born as a refugee in the diaspora, lived in multiple countries, all this kind of stuff, away from family. And it's exhausting, it's really sad. And so I think there are many of us Palestinians who dream of being able to have some kind of unity and aren't filled with the hate. And I'm not saying that there's, of course people can be angry and hateful when they see genocides and these kind of things. But I think, in time, as people kind of work on, that's a whole other issue. But I think mainly I want to hear about this historical precedents about unity, one state that's coming from a completely different angle. So can somebody say something about that?
Yes, I
So
can say a lot about
yeah,
it,
but
then yeah.
Shlomo, the question is that, are you saying that the one state ideas had traditionally always been like from the communist and sort of thinking, and today it's not? Is that Rena what you're asking? Because
Yeah, so from my
okay,
understanding, my dad was part of these communities that were unified in their ideology between
yeah,
Palestinians and Israelis, and they did not come from a capitalist angle. They
I see.
came from a more Marxist and communist
Yes.
angle, and so why
So,
why
so
don't
the so the
yeah
unifying factor was anti-capitalist. This was what brought together Palestinians and Israelis. I see. And then, but
yeah
okay. So Jeff, maybe the question is that in today's model, now that we have sort of the post-Cold War era, not we're not capitalist versus communist world. How does that change how has it evolved maybe for the people who support one state solution, for example? And it's
and
interesting also that one state
yeah.
solution is also even advocated among right-wing Israelis. But of course, it's a different type of one-state solution where Palestinians have civil rights, but they don't have political rights. So they're actually advocating this sometimes even more than the leftists.
Palestinians in the occupied territories don't have civil rights in that one thing. That
Yes,
part?
yes. Yeah, they want to do like an Emirates plan or something or give them sort of what's called civil rights. There's a few advocates of this kind of a solution.
Look, just briefly, let's say there were kind of two one state ideas before 1948. One was the Marxists, the communists. There was one party. It was a Palestinian Jewish, party here, but it was still a Zionist. The Jews were still Zionists, because the Soviet Union, had this kind of ambivalent attitude. They supported Zionism partly because they wanted the Jews out, and the idea was that the Jews were, the Zionists, position Ben Gurion and these people positioned themselves as socialists. Israel, until maybe 20 years ago, belonged to the Socialist International, of socialist countries. It was labor Zionism and all of that. So, and the hope of the Soviet Union was that Israel would become kind of a base of the Soviet Union in the Middle East. And this was actually a fear of the Americans as well. But what happened in 1947 was that Stalin supported, when the partition plan came about, Stalin supported the partition plan. It supported Zionism, having a Jewish state in Palestine, and that destroyed not only the one state idea, but it destroyed the Palestinian, Jewish kind of a union. Since then, you haven't had that union. It was a betrayal of the Soviet Union of the Palestinians. Now, there was another thing I just mentioned it really quickly, and that is cultural Zionism. There was a school or whatever you want to call it within Zionism of intellectuals. And that's the problem. Intellectuals are eggheads and they don't get involved. So Ben Gurion was the political Zionist guy. We have to have a state, we have to have an army, we build institutions, we do all that stuff. The cultural Zionists said, no, we reject nationalism. We want a cultural nationalism. Yes, we Jews want to come back. We want to revive our national culture. We want a Hebrew university. We want a Hebrew language, Hebrew literature. We want to come back and live here, but together with the Palestinians. Our cultural nationalism and their cultural nationalism should develop together because Palestinians also didn't really have the idea of a state. Don't forget that after World War I mean, Palestine was a part of Syria. It had its own culture and so on, but it was really a part of Syria. After World War I, Woodrow Wilson was the one that developed the idea of self-determination at Versailles. So after World War I, Wilson said, okay, I want to know what the people of Palestine want, right? So he sent what was called the King Crane Commission. The king, I think, was a businessman and Crane was a judge. And they went all over Palestine, talking to everybody. And they wrote a report in which they said all the Palestinians, well, no, first of all, what they said was the majority, the high majority of Palestinians want to remain a part of Syria. So there wasn't the idea of a Palestinian state right away. They wanted, but that was impossible because of the British and the French and so on. And therefore, if that's impossible, then all the Palestinians wanted a Palestinian state as a second thing. And of course, all the Jews wanted a Jewish state. But 93% of, at that time, something like 90% of the population was Palestinian. So the cultural Zionists were the one that said, let's go with that. Let's live together. We'll have our nationalisms together in a cultural sense. And of course, the political Zionists, who were the settler colonists, said, no, this is our country. We take it over with force if necessary. Just one more sentence. So what's interesting today is I could sell the one state, even in Zionist terms, to go back to these, because political Zionism won. Ben-Gurion and all these people won. They have a state, an army, but it's exhausted itself. And that's where I'm going back to October 7th. I think Israelis are beginning to see that they have nowhere to go. It's exhausted itself, and they're leaving, the more progressive ones. And so in a way, political Zionism has reached the end, even though it seems so strong with the army and everything. And cultural Zionism then becomes the way forward into one state of equal rights for Jews and Palestinians, in this country. So you could even put it within a Zionist framework, because cultural Zionism, kind of this whole idea of nationalism being so divisive. Well, if it's a kind of a cultural nationalism, where in a way you say, look, we're giving up the idea of self-determination in terms of either it's this your state or my state, but we're keeping self-determination in a cultural sense, our language, our customs, our history, our land, and everything else. And now let's find a way to politically build around that so we can live together as two peoples. That is very doable, I think. So I think cultural Zionism is going to come back as the way in which Israelis can reintegrate into the area and go beyond the political Zionism that was so destructive.
Thanks again, Jeff. Thanks for that question, Rana. Go ahead, Tina, and then we'll go to Joseph and then Shlomo. Tina, please unmute yourself. Unmute. We can't hear you unless you unmute.
All right. I feel that this conversation has been isolated in a way to not include the international politics that is going on right now. Because Iran also has an interest in how Israel survives or not. And I would just like someone to talk about, what you're ignoring the political reality right now. It's been proven that Iran can do major damage to Israel in defense of Palestine. Excuse me. Thank you.
Okay. No, you're right. I mean, we haven't talked about very much. Again, Israel has its own agenda in terms of Iran and the Middle East, and that is normalization. So that for Israel, the focus is on the Abraham Accords. We don't hear about them much anymore, but they're still very much alive. Kazakhstan just joined, so there's still countries joining. And this is the normalization idea. If Israel can get to normalization, it wins. Okay. So now if we go back to pacification as a prerequisite, you've got to break all resistance. So if you look at settler colonialism, at the process from that point of view, that explains Gaza. Why did Israel destroy Gaza, commit the genocide? Because you can't get to normalization as long as there's resistance. Because normalization requires quiet. It requires the sense that, yes, this is normal. Otherwise, you can't sell it. So that explains Gaza and the attacks on the West Bank. But in terms of Iran and Hezbollah, you have to also pacify the external supporters of the Palestinians. And so that's why Israel went after
Palestinians to just surrender. I don't think that's going to happen. You
Iranians?
can't expect Palestinians to just surrender to Israel.
No, of course not. No, no, it's not a matter of surrendering. It's a matter of being pacified. It's a matter of being on, you break the resistance to a point where they simply cannot resist it. That's not surrender. That's simply breaking the resistance, and that allows the normalization to happen. So from the international point of view, it was very important for Israel to neutralize Iran as the rival military hegemon in the region, and to neutralize Hezbollah as well. Now you've got regional pacification, and the assumption of Israel, I'm not sure if it's true, but the assumption of Israel is that now that we've become kind of the sole military hegemon here, the Sunni world, the Arab world, needs us to protect them against Iran and the Houthis and so on. So Israel feels it's created a kind of a dependency. Saudi Arabia and the UAE will become the economic hegemons, and Israel will become the military hegemon. Now, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's going to work, because I think Israel's introducing, but that's the concept. And the concept is we break all resistance of Palestinians and those that support Palestinians, and that allows the normalization process to move ahead.
Well, my
That's
worry,
Israel's agenda, not Trump's.
my worry is that Israel needs to understand and fear the fact that they can be destroyed by Iran. Now, I know that's one reason that Israel has wanted to destroy Iran, but now Iran has been given a reason to want to destroy Israel. And I think this is going to, I don't understand how Israel cannot see this.
Well, I mean, they do see. They attacked Iran. They want to destroy Iran, basically. Trump has held them back, but I think Israel does see Iran as its existential threat. That's its goal.
You think it would be smarter if they use the fear that Sunnis have of a Shia dominated world to sort of like, if you took Palestinian situation out of the equation, then what would Iran do? That's what their leverage is, that we are the ones standing up for Palestine. But if you solve the Palestinian problem, that leverage is gone. And I don't understand. So that's a better question to ask, is that, collaborate with countries like Jordan and Syria that are in the Gulf that are terrified of Iran, and solve the Palestinian problem, and then that leverage goes away, it disappears. But for some reason, it's almost like they want to fan this flame. It's crazy.
Yeah, but you can't solve the Palestinian problem and keep Israel as a Jewish state.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Contradictory. Either it's one or the other.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks,
That's right.
Tina.
And I think that is the crux of the problem.
Yeah.
Well, the picture is bigger than that.
Yeah. So let's do Joseph, and then we'll go to Shlomo.
Okay, Jeff, I have a question for you. My impression of Israeli society is that it is very divided on multiple levels, and Israelis just don't trust the government. They don't trust each other. They don't trust each other within the government. The parties don't trust each other. There isn't a single institution that Israelis trust, not the Supreme Court, not the military, not the government, not the Knesset. The division is very, very severe. Do you think that the election results will be accepted by the parties that are running, or will they deny the election results? And if they do not accept the election results, could that lead to the collapse of the state of Israel as a Jewish state? Because it does not have a single institution that can put it together that everyone trusts.
Look, in terms of the divisions, it's true there's a lot of divisions, but there are no divisions in terms of Palestinians. I mean, their Israelis are all pretty much united. You know, like I said, 94% supported the assault in Gaza. So, you know, from that point of view, from what we're talking about, I think that's less an issue. And in fact, you know, that's why Netanyahu is really at the center, because he's the divisive force. He's the one that's, partly because of his trial and everything else, he's the one that's pushing these divisive initiatives like judicial reform, like changing the electoral system, all of that. So I think the fear is not that the Likud or one bloc or the other would not accept the election results, is that Netanyahu himself, with the support of his party, will engineer things in a way. For example, the Likud now is trying to get control of the electoral commission that both approves parties from running. So one of his ways out, you know, I said the Arabs are sort of the swing. Well, if he can get the electoral commission to be his right-wing people, they can disqualify the Arab parties, saying, you know, I mean, one of them is Islamic Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, you know, other ones are, you know, communists or whatever. So that wouldn't be hard. So then now you're just down to putting together a government without the Arabs, and that makes things much easier, you know, for Netanyahu and so on. So that's the fear. Not that the parties, I don't think it's a distrust of the parties. I think it really is the fear that Netanyahu is like Trump, is going to manipulate the system in a way that he stays in power, I think.
Yeah, and since you already mentioned that basically they have the same ideas, the same purpose, the same everything, they are actually what they will do is very simple. They will do a collaboration with the two major parties, which are really very similar anyway. And that will be the new government. It will be like united government. That's what they will do, in my opinion. But time will tell.
Just one thing, if you got rid of Netanyahu, he's the reason why the opposition exists. Because they don't want, if you got rid of Netanyahu, you would have one government of about 100 or more out of the 120. I mean, they're all united ideologically in terms of the Palestinians and everything else. Eisenkot, Gantz, Bennett, Lapid, the
Yeah,
Likud,
they actually
they're
have the
all
same vision.
united.
They actually all share the same vision for the West Bank.
Exactly.
I mean, they basically, even Eisenkot advocates for annexing most of the West Bank and maybe some sort of Palestinian state. And I don't even know, he could have probably changed this because, like you said, he doesn't really have a position. And
Yes.
it was Nefatali Bennett, and he just recently just said it again. I would annex 70% of the West Bank and give Palestinians area A and B to have a sovereign territory. And this is something that they all share. So the difference between them is literally 4 or 5% of territories of what Palestinians are going to control in areas of A and B. And this is what's frustrating, is that for people like me, is that the Israeli society is like, the best we can hope for is someone like Eisenkot. I don't even think like Yair Golan doesn't stand a chance, and I don't even think he would want to even give, you know, it would sacrifice anything. And that's why I'm saying is that the real obstacle here is Israeli society. It's really like it's the cancer here that just, we need to solve this problem.
You have to work around them.
Yeah.
You can't work with them.
Okay.
No.
So let me
Yeah.
ask you this. There's a party, the party that's been formed by the members of Stand Together, Rola Dahoud and Alan Lee Green. They formed a party called, I believe it's called something like A Place for Us All. And now they're trying to basically form a party that's going to be joint between the Palestinians and Israeli citizens of Israel. However, I was in a call with some people who were talking about this, and they were saying that this could possibly divide any type of opposition. So, because now remember, these people don't support a one-state solution. They actually their platform calls for two-state solution, which is, it's dividing it. So many of these parties on the left and the opposition, and when I say opposition, I mean opposition to all the center-right parties, not just Netanyahu's government, because technically these guys are oppositions as well. But is that that the left is so split. It's split over things like anti-Zionist versus liberal Zionist, two-state versus one state, and that as long as these divisions, it will basically guarantee victory in the elections to these parties that support, what's the status quo.
That's right. And the activists, that's it's true all over the world today. The young activists don't have an ideology. They don't have an analysis. They don't have a plan. They don't have a strategy. They're not really organized. This whole idea of social movements, that's what standing together is. It's a kind of a social movement, and we're going to be grassroots, and we're going to all live together. I mean, it's almost a stereotypical liberal, kumbaya kind of approach. I mean, standing together as a liberal Zionist two-state organization. I don't know why any Palestinians support them. They have a few, but it's inside Israel. They don't work with Palestinians in the occupied territory at all. So, it's this very I just, it really points to the poverty of the left. I mean, they're not even left. They're kind of liberals in a way. And I mean, you know that in the States too, to a large degree, I think. Uh, so that's the problem we have. There is no left. There are liberal Zionists, but there is no left, and really no left in the sense of organizing. The young people. I mean, I'm talking a lot to the young activists because I'm trying to understand, and they're all saying no. We don't want to organize. We don't want a party. We don't want a budget. We don't want an office. We don't want a plan. We don't want a strategy. That's not the way we work. We work with social movements and we get thousands of people out on the streets and digital, all the digital stuff, which in my generation would not be considered, effective political organization. So the split there is partly ideological because a lot of the left is still Zionist. That's the whole two-state idea. And in my view, confederations fall into that as well. But at the same time, it's also generational. They just don't see the point of organizing.
And,
So
and you know what's happened really in Israel is the education. And you have a book by Nurit Peled El-Hanan about the education in Israel.
that's right.
It's unbelievable that this is called even education, but that's what they have. This is what you raise a new generation of Judeo-Nazis, and no wonder about the genocide here and genocide there. But and also the parties, I don't see opposition. It's like here, the two sides of the two cheeks of the same ass, according to George Galloway. Anyway, so a question
Sounds like
to I would like to first of all, I agree with Nasir 100%. The Israeli society is totally lunatic now, and they are so you have to denazify them in a way, and I don't know how you can do it. I think
that'll
the
happen
only
after the transition. Like I said, you're not gonna change them before. Once they're living in a new reality, one state, civil society, equal rights, they don't have the power anymore they had, they'll come around. They'll get used to it, but it's not going to happen before. You're not going to convince them and then get through you have to do a transition first and then work on them.
100%. But what
Yeah.
transition? What do you mean by transition exactly? How this transition is going to happen?
A transition from apartheid to a democracy. And if we have a good idea of what a democracy means, what does one state look like? Even the ANC, remember, had a constitution before the end of apartheid. If we could draft a constitution to show the world and Israeli Jews that they have a place in the new country, this isn't a danger to them. This isn't against them. It's against the system. And once we have a just system, then everybody will have equal rights and security and everything else. So I think then if we can show that, then BDS, the problem with BDS, it's a standalone thing. It is not connected to any political program. So what are you BDSing for? So if we can, what the ANC did is they connected BDS to an end game. We all of us of a certain age that were against apartheid knew that we were BDSing the South African government for one person, one vote. That was the end game. And de Klerk could come to Mandela in prison and say, we want power sharing, we want this, we want that. And Mandela said, no, one person, one vote. And everybody knew that, and that was fine with the international community. Who's going to fight against democracy? And that's why the BDS was able, and other factors, of course, to collapse the economy because it was connected to an end game. If you just wanted to collapse the South African government, and then nobody knows what's going to happen next, nobody would have supported that. So I think if we have a clear idea of what one state looks like, and then we make Israel collapse for a transition to democracy, I think that's a scenario that the international community could very much support.
That sound to me like IPC. I don't know about you, but I mean, this is very much like along the line of Yossi and Al. So anyway, but then one more idea, one more thought I have that, the Europeans kicked us, the Jews, from Europe and told us, go to Palestine, go kill whoever you want. We don't want you here anyway. How about all the Israelis get a European passport, citizenship? How about getting American citizenship? What do you think? I mean, wouldn't this be step number one to decolonize Palestine?
Of course, if that happened, I mean, the country would empty out.
That actually brings me to a question, Jeff, because most anti-Zionist Israelis today that I'm speaking to, they're sort of exhausted to the sense that they tell me if I had a foreign passport, I would leave. I'm done with this place. So how does someone like you, like personally, like you feel like, do you feel like you've reached that point where like you're like, this is crazy? I just, I have a U.S. citizenship. I could just, go.
Yeah, but from my point of view, the U.S. isn't a better option. I left the U.S. for very definite reasons. And every time I go back to Kennedy Airport, I remember why I left. So that's not, and I'm committed to the struggle. I don't think if you're politically committed, the answer isn't when things get tough, you leave. So I'm going to stay here and fight it out. Is a commitment.
Nasir, can I ask a simple question, Nasir?
Sure. Go ahead. And go ahead. We'll do, go ahead, Olivia, and then we'll go to Patricia. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. My voice is a little bit hoarse with the air conditioning. It's a very simple question for Jeff. Jeff, I agree that one has to bring settler colonialism to an end. Do you think a simple thing might help? That's called revolution. Revolution. Mm-hmm. Israeli society is sick. They've got psychiatric problems. It's a lunatic society, as Finkelstein says. A lunatic society. They're not going to reason, and they're getting lots of money from the evangelicals, from the donor class, and the whole thing is depraved. It's just so absolutely revolting. It's just very, very sick. What they need is a good revolution. It might be bloody. It might be bloody. It would be bloody.
But in that case, who would the revolutionaries be? The revolutionaries are inside, or they're from the occupation.
I agree. Yes, like the South Africans, they would need outside support. They would need support from countries around the world. The only people that have supported Europe hasn't supported the Palestinians. The only people that have supported the Palestinians have been Hezbollah and the Houthis. Who else has supported them? Yeah. We've just sat by and sold arms to Israel. It's disgraceful.
I think you abroad are really the major allies. You're the leverage that the Palestinians have, and anti-colonial like me. You guys abroad, but you have to be led. You have to be focused and directed, and so on. And I think that's the way to go. There's not going to be an eternal revolution, I'm afraid.
Well, that's what they need. That's what
Thank
they
you.
need.
Thanks,
But
Olivia.
when you talk about, yeah, but when you talk about Eisenkot and Netanyahu continuing in power, that would be the continuation of hell, hell and genocide. Well, they've had enough of hell and genocide. They've had 100 years of hell and genocide. Okay. Okay. Yeah,
Thank you.
that would be the continuation of genocide and hell.
Yeah.
I mean,
All
my
right.
God. My
All right.
God.
Thanks, Olivia. We're gonna go to Patricia and then to
Sure,
Sean.
sure,
And
sure.
by the way,
Yeah,
stay
sure.
cool. I know you guys are having a heat wave in Europe. Heart goes out to everyone in Europe right now with that heat
40
wave. So,
degrees, 40
yeah.
degrees. Terrible, terrible.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us Middle Eastern people about hot summers. We it's
Well, I think
actually
about
cooler
people
in the
in
Middle
tents.
East than it is
That's
in
it.
Europe.
I think about people in tents or people whose houses have
Yeah,
been demolished.
yeah, it's
That's what I
terrible.
think about right
Awesome.
now.
Thank you,
People who
Olivia.
have no drinking water.
Yeah. Go
You're
ahead,
welcome.
Patricia.
Oh, hi. You've quoted a lot things that we can learn from the struggle in South Africa and the anti-apartheid things, and you frequently quoted Nelson Mandela. But what the Palestinians don't seem to have is, a leader that is widely acknowledged by them and respected. And each time somebody looks as if they might be a suitable leader, Israel either kills them or imprisons them. I'm wondering if we should have more of a campaign to get, for example, Marwan Barghouti released, because it looks like he's gradually being killed in prison, and yet and he seems to have widespread support amongst Fatah, Hamas, people on the West Bank, people in Gaza. It's got to come from the Palestinians, but every time they have somebody who can be a respected, supported spokesman, they get removed. And I'm just thinking, how can we help to make sure they have some decent leader?
Well, I think, there's things that Palestinians have to do themselves, and including Palestinians abroad. You know, the big problem is the Palestinian Authority. They're the collaborationists. They're the extension of the Israeli security. All the people in prison were arrested mainly by the Palestinian police or security services, not even by the Israelis. I mean, there's torture, there's killing. The Palestinian Authority is what's the heavy hand on everything. So I think there should be a Palestinian campaign, because it can't be a campaign of others in a way against the PA. If there was a Palestinian campaign for elections to the PA, to be sure, I mean, there are Palestinian initiatives to try to revive the PLO that the PA kind of dismantled. There's got to be a real Palestinian political vehicle, a liberation vehicle, in order to release. I mean, there's hundreds of Mandelas in Palestine. You have the leadership, you have the ideas. Everything I'm talking about isn't because I'm not criticizing Palestinians that they don't have a political plan or they can't organize or they have no leadership. What I'm saying is they have all that, but they're being suppressed by Israel and especially the PA. So what they need is political space. The international community should work with the Palestinian people to provide them with a protective space where they can come together and organize and think about political plans and not fear the PA and Israel. And I think this should be a major campaign to protect the Palestinians from their own government. And if they have that kind of a space, and then there can be a popular, 80% of Palestinians hate the PA and Abu Mazen and so on. So if there were real elections, you could get an alternative leadership in. But all that is prevented. So I think this is, the PA has to be dealt with. This is the blockage point for the that's the source of the paralysis.
But
And until you break through with the PA, very little can happen, I
the
think.
PA is the tool by Israel. Israel is putting the PA there, exactly like the Nazis put the Judenrats on top of there. And you cannot ask the Jews in Auschwitz to somehow get rid of the Judenrats. It's difficult.
It's difficult.
All right, go ahead, Sean, and then we'll go to Rena.
Hi, can you hear me good or my
Yeah, we
microphone?
hear you. Yeah, no, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. I wrote on the text for anybody who has Instagram, they can follow this guy, David Say Stuff. And this David, I watched one of his videos on Instagram, and he mentions about how, because he said his father was in the IDF under when Ariel Sharon was the prime minister at that time, and he mentioned about how Israel is at a very young age were indoctrinated about how who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Like they were indoctrinated in such a young age where they didn't have the conscience of their own, where they can think for themselves or ask questions. Like they implement the Zionist narratives in them while they were growing, and then once they got older, they it was easier for them to put them in the IDF, and they wouldn't question it. They would believe that. Like now, uh, these because now these Zionists are so wrapped up in this narrative that they like it's hard to break their because they don't know anything else. And this is no, and this is not a conspiracy. This is what he says. This guy, you can find him on David. His name is David Spenvek, whatever his last name was. But all he was saying, like indoctrination was much easier to where it was more subtle than trying to tell people to go to join the IDF. So, you know, soldiers, it was much easier then because because when they're young, they're more vulnerable to agree with the Zionist narrative. That if they were older, they would question it. But once they get older and they're already implemented the Zionist narrative in them, like it's hard for them to change their way of thinking because like all I'm saying, it was easier to get to manipulate somebody at a young age when if they were older they were more. This is what he said, and frankly he makes a lot of sense to it. And this thing with this Zionist narrative going on with young kids and all that as they get older and they want to join the IDF, like I don't know if this cycle is going to break or they're going to can continue to keep telling these to a young generation Israeli. And yeah, I know it's not and it's not a conspiracy. It's well documented, and this is what this guy. I don't make things up. I get it from sources, and I speak the sources that what I read and what I heard on the yeah.
No,
Go ahead.
indoctrination is certainly part of it. I mean, the whole educational system is you can't have critical thinking because if you're a colonist and your whole system is based on oppressing another people but justifying it, no critical thinking person would accept that. You'd see through the narrative, you'd see through what's going on. And so you have to prevent people from being critical. You have to keep them in the box. So indoctrination is a part of it, but also it's the whole system. The colonial system has a logic to it. For example, you all live in a capitalist system. Nobody has to indoctrinate you on how to be a consumer. You guys are all behaving just the way capitalism wants you to behave. You're buying what they want you to buy. You're doing this. Nobody has to tell you or indoctrinate you. So it's like two levels. The system itself tames you and domesticates you. If I want a Jewish state, I have to be against Palestinians. Nobody has to. That's common sense. And then at the same time, then the indoctrination is, well, why do we have to be a Jewish state? Because of this, this, and this. So you're right. I mean, there's two levels, but Israelis have no way to break out of it. And that's why it's so hard to work with them. Even I'll tell you just a little tiny thing. After the army, Israeli kids go abroad. They all want to get out for a while, for a year or so. And they go to the furthest areas. They go to Nepal, they go to the Amazon, they go all over the place, New Guinea, Thailand, but they always go in groups. They never go as individuals when they go, because in the group they're carrying that bubble with them. You see, they're going out. They're afraid of encountering people from abroad because they know the hostility and they know they can't defend. And so they carry their Israeli bubble with them when they go abroad, always in groups. They speak Hebrew to each other. There's that whole, group solidarity. And then it's groups in the Amazon, groups in Nepal, so you're not exposed to other people and other views. And then you come home and then you're back in the bubble itself. So Israelis are really very afraid to expose themselves, in that kind of a way, because they really have nothing except slogans to defend themselves with, but they work as long as you keep that group thing going.
All right, let's go to Rana. And are you good on time, Jeff? We're almost 2 hours. Are you good on time?
Yeah, are you guys good on? I mean, this is 2 hours is a long time to ask me
Yeah.
that.
Nasir, I have to go, so
Okay.
I would like to thank Jeff.
I mean, I was supposed to go to the gym 20 minutes ago, but
Yeah,
okay.
let's do this because I'm actually out of town today, and so let's go for another 2 questions, and then we'll wrap it up if that's okay with you.
But Jeff, I just want to thank you so much for participating and for your generosity. You're always generous answering questions. So thank you so much. But I have to go.
Yeah.
See you in November.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, awesome. We're gonna go to Shlomo again, and then I think there's somebody else had their hand up. I guess they put it down. If you
Oh,
wanted
no,
to.
it was me. I thought it was my turn, Nasir.
Oh, okay.
I put it down because I thought it was going to be my turn.
Okay, no problem. Okay, I'll call on you next, Shlomo. We're gonna wrap up in about like 5 minutes, so let's kind of like make it a little bit shorter if you don't mind. Go ahead, Shlomo.
Well, quickly to answer right now, given that Marwan Barghouti is in jail and being killed slowly, I would say Hamas would be the alternative. And if I am the president or the prime minister of Israel, the first thing I do, I talk to Hamas. That's me. Okay, number two. Iran. There was a question about Iran. Again, you have to look at the big picture. Israel always needs some Hitler somewhere. The Hitler is this and Hitler is that. Now Hitler is Iran. But who created that Hitler? It is Israel created it, and the United States, of course, together. And so what you need is to take a step back and remind yourself that Iran, when Rouhani came to power years back, he actually extended his hand to end this conflict between Iran and Israel, and of course Palestinians were on the map. I mean, they wouldn't give up on it, and if Israel would have agreed to two-state solution, there will be Iran will be part of the Abraham Accord and everything. But Israel say no way. In fact, Netanyahu, I remember his reaction. I was shocked. He reacted so violently and so negatively to this almost offer of peace. And ever since, it is like, okay, yeah, let's go for Iran. Iran is the enemy. Yes, Iran can exterminate Israel. Yeah. Okay, so now what you do? You poke the bear more and more. You poke the bear in the eye, and what do you expect? So that's about Iran, by the way, for Iran, whoever asked about it. But again, you have to look at the big picture. The big picture is, I think, Jeff, you mentioned, is capitalism, imperialism, right? And capitalism. And here comes the other side, which is the communism and socialism that another, I think Rana asked about. And there is a lot I can talk about it. We don't have time. But yes, I absolutely agree that this could have been a solution. But of course, the other stream were much, much stronger. The imperialism was much stronger and they won. Yeah. Thank you very much, by the way.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Shlomo.
you. All right, go ahead, Rana.
Okay. One quick comment is I'm not so concerned about Israel in terms of their power because it seems like they are self-destructing, and it's obvious that it's not democratic and it's not Jewish as a country, a nation. And then if it's true, the brain drain and some of the things that Jeff mentioned, I don't see how it will continue to flourish. But my question to Jeff is, he said the international community needs to come into play and to build up within the Palestinian community in Palestine, and politically build them up, because many are opposed to their own the PA. But my honest question is, who in the international community could be that? Because as I've seen, the United Nations and supporting countries and others have proved powerless in the midst of a genocide that people have watched, like, on satellite TV, on their phones. So, like, if they can't stop a genocide, and if they aren't able to even open borders to feed starving people, who do we go to, other than God? Who do we go to, in the international community?
Well, I think all of you, I think the international civil society, the peoples
Okay.
are the ones because there's millions. I mean, the whole world has come out for Palestine. The problem is that they have to be led. There has to be a program. They have to know, what are we advocating for? It's good. It's great to have, you have 300,000 people in a rally in London. Every few weeks, they get hundreds of thousands of people. But, they have the rally and there's all the slogans and people speak and then everybody goes home. There's no follow-up. The problem with social movements and this stuff is there's no follow-up. There's no leadership. Again, there's no program. So I think there has to be a Palestinian coordinating committee or a Palestinian organization here that works with the internet, all the groups in the international community, in order to create a coordinated, focused international movement. So Palestinians have to provide a program. What do we want you to advocate for? This is the civil society. But they can't do that as long as the PA is on their heads. It's all kind of one thing dependent on the other. And at the same time, I think if they would do that, then the international community would be empowered to go to your representatives and say, not only stop the arms trade and BDS and this and that, but this is the solution or the political program we want you to do, like the end of apartheid in South Africa. So you've got to have a political ask of your government. Otherwise, it's just slogans or whatever. So it's like we have to create a protective space the Palestinians here can organize. Palestinians here have to organize. And once they organize with a political program, then they have to mobilize all of you. And then you have your marching orders. And then I think together we can all influence governments. Don't forget, it was really the isolation of South Africa that caused its downfall. Well, Israel is getting very isolated, but it's not isolated towards a particular end. It's not enough just to isolate Israel. You've got to say why we're isolating Israel in order to get to what? To get to a political program. So that whole dynamic is missing today. We're working on it here. I'm the head of ICAD, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. By the way, you should look at our website, which has a lot of great information.
You took me on a tour 19 years ago with a social justice organization. So
Exactly.
we've actually met, but you wouldn't remember me. So I'm very familiar with the organization and I'm grateful for it.
Right. I've been talking for a long time. But also I'm a part of a Palestinian-led group called the One Democratic State Campaign. So we're trying to organize here. It's difficult, but anyway, this kind of discussion helps because it helps, I hope, to clarify where we need to go politically.
Yes, this is really helpful, and I hope that I can.
Sure.
I especially want to receive the portion of the conversation that you just shared, because I am part of an organization, and I recently was in Washington advocating, having several meetings with my representatives, and I continue to advocate and plan on meeting with representatives, and it's all been through one organization. And I was part of another organization in the past, APER, Americans for Palestinian Equal Rights, no longer around. But I absolutely agree with what you say, that we need something here, connecting there, and working together. And everything you said has really kind of helped me to kind of have a bigger picture of what would be helpful. So I really thank you for your time. And I hope we get a copy of this recording.
Yeah, we will. By the way, there will be an email if you're on the email list, Rana. Also the website. The
Okay.
recording is available there for all the meetings of everyone. So it will be there on the website, and then you'll be notified once it's made available. We send out an email to everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Shlomo, I think we
Yeah,
said that
Rana,
was
I
the
just
last
say
thing.
one sentence.
Go
Rana,
ahead,
we
go
need
ahead.
to
One
talk.
sentence.
One sentence. Rana, we need to talk. Okay, I'm in DC too, so we'll talk.
Yes.
But the
Okay, I'll send
Shlomo,
question,
you a
yeah,
message right now,
yeah,
Shlomo.
yeah. Shlomo is definitely an ally to have in Washington. By the way, he's a good guy.
well, I am with Code Pink, and I
Yes.
don't know if you heard about them. But anyway, so quickly, just one thought I have. Just one thought for the Palestinians. If I were a Palestinian, there should be one slogan, in my opinion: no self-determination, not from the river to the no, just equal rights. That's it. That's what the South African did, and that's what they should do. And this is exactly what Marwan Barghouti said, and this is exactly why he is in jail, because that's the most effective, in fact, way to go. But that's it.
Okay. Yeah, and on that note, the last words that you said, Jeff, were actually summarized things beautiful. I don't think you could have summarized anything much better than that. I want to thank you for participating with us today, and as well as everybody else who participated. This has been definitely one. Jeff, I did send you a message through Substack, so I hope we can keep in touch afterwards. It'd be nice, and it'd be a pleasure to even meet you as well. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. I
Yeah.
appreciate
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Yeah.
Thanks for
very much.
joining.
Yes.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah.
kind of you. Thank you
Yeah. Have
Chazak
for your
everybody
time.
good.
Chazak very
Take
much.
care.